let's go ahead and get started with my review for the Orphan First Kill, chat. So in case you don't know, I have seen the original Orphan, chat, the 2009 film, which was a solid thriller, chat, solid horror thriller. You know, I was like, okay, started simple, crazy little girl going around murdering people, trying to ingratiate herself to her adoptive parents, fine. But then it threw you through a loop when it was revealed at pretty much the tail end of the movie, chat, you know, that this girl was adopted by Vera Farmiga, and one of the 17 Skarsgård brothers that are walking the earth was in fact a 35-year-old dwarf, chat, who wanted to kill and get as much dick as she possibly could. And I was like, wow. That was an interesting twist, chat. I was like, oh, it's kind of always been the pop culture zeitgeist since that time. But I never would have thought they would have made a sequel, let alone a prequel sequel to 2009 Orphan, chat. But they went ahead and they did it, chat. And I'm like, get out of here. I'm like, this is going to be bad. This is going to be very unintentionally funny. This is not going to work. When the trailers eventually came out and I saw the trailers, chat, I was like, come on. This girl, who was played by, you know, the very talented Isabelle Fuhrman, is back in the same role 10 plus years later, now a 25-year-old woman trying to pass off as not a 10-year-old girl, but a 9-year-old girl. And I'm like, no, this ain't working. She has crow's feet. She has many lines in her forehead as I do, chat. This isn't going to work, you know. But the thing is, I still went in, it's like, all right, everyone that I know who had the same feelings as I did, or maybe they were a little more positive, they've seen this film, they walked away with it, and they've told me, you know what, it's actually surprisingly fun. It's good. And I'm like, okay, fine. I was like, all right, I'll go in with a bit of an open mind, kinda. And if I eat crow, if I eat a big slice of humble pie, I will. And I'll tell you how I feel about this movie, chat. And the thing is, you know, I kept thinking, with a premise as ridiculous as this, how can it be good? Well, like I said, it does the smart thing and actually embraces how stupid its premise is and has fun with it. I have to say, I walked away, chat, legitimately, honestly, speaking earnestly right now, it's actually a fun, goofy thriller. It has some nice twists and turns, some that I just did not expect. And thankfully, they knew, because they're like, okay, we got to keep audiences here. It's a little shorter than the original one, which was smart, about an hour 30 instead of like the 2 hours. I think the first one might be just over 2 hours. But it's got some nice twists and turns that come relatively quickly into the movie. And the whole premise being, Chad, that this takes place in Estonia in the kind of mid-2000s. I think it's like maybe a little in the late 2007, where we have the character of Esther, whose real name is actually Leela. She is in the asylum, Chad, which is basically, they call it this medical, hospital. It's fucking Arkham Asylum. That's where it is, Chad, where they house all of Estonia's craziest supervillains and mental patients. And the most dangerous of them all, Chad, is little Isabelle Fuhrman, Chad, little Lena Klammer, who will one day become Esther Albright, the infamous character in both films. And, she escapes, and she then poses as a missing American girl, and she ingratiates herself to a very rich, wealthy American family in Connecticut, Chad. And then things eventually transpires. You know what? At the top, I can say, from the first few minutes of the movie, I feel like it starts out with very moody, with a nice kind of soft focus aesthetic. I think the film's lighting and the settings make it feel almost kind of like a period piece in a way, even though it's very much, I mean, in a sense, it is a period piece because it is taking place in the 2000s, Chad, the mid to late 2000s. But despite being set in the mid-2000s, it kind of has the aesthetic sensibilities of something like a 70s thriller, like Don't Look Now or Black Christmas and The Omen. I just kind of really like the wintry setting. It's very, very moody. And there's some really good cinematography in this film. Kind of showcases the various settings that we're in, both in Estonia, and then later on we go to Connecticut, full of a lot of trees, Chad, a lot of snowy landscapes. And another thing too about it, that I think the cast hold their own with the material that they're given. And Isabelle Fuhrman and Julia Stiles, who plays the mother, quote unquote, of Esther, are definitely the standouts of the cast. They really embrace the goofy, the material, and they roll with both the good and the bad to the best of their abilities. And I will say, not to get into too many spoilers, but they do have a nice rivalry in the movie that did surprise me. Now, however, despite the good stuff, and there's some good stuff in there, there is some stuff that just doesn't work. There are numerous character inconsistencies with Esther's abilities. That's the crazy thing about this. Like in the original film, it's like, okay, she's precocious and, she's stabbing people and manipulating people. They pretty much set her up. This is not really a spoiler. They set her up as like the most dangerous Estonian criminal in the country's history. She has the strength, sometimes, of that of Michael Myers, where she will take someone and just start smashing their face into a wall and killing them, chat. But then other times, even within the same scene, she has the strength of a little girl. And it's that kind of thing like, well, wait a minute. You were literally throwing people around the room and smashing a guy's face and bludgeoning people to death constantly. But now you're like, no, you can't do anything. Now you're struggling to move a body when you were literally throwing bodies around. That doesn't make any sense. It's like you can't have it both ways. You got to stick with one. Either she is like a supernatural killer like Michael Myers, or she's like I'm a dwarf. That's what it is. Or I have the strength of a little girl. Also, chat. Now, even though some of the technical aspects of this film I think are quite good, there's some fun stuff. I mean, again. The soft focus was a bold choice. Thought that would kind of get a little annoying for me, but it works. Makes it very moody, very atmospheric, and there's some really nice cinematography. Really just kind of captures like the feeling of coldness, right? Despite like this warm family that you're going back to, there is some stuff that does come across unintentionally funny, and they use a lot of body doubles in this movie for Isabelle Fuhrman because she is a full-grown woman, chat. She's 25 or 27 or however old she is. She's in her 20s now. And they're trying to pass her off as a 9-year-old girl. Now, oh, God. The height thing is not handled well, in my opinion, because there's a lot of cuts to far shots and shots from behind, and it's obvious, like, that is not Isabelle Fuhrman. That is a little girl. That's a body double standing in there. Just like the look, the facial structure from the back, like the head, it's like there's like 3 different heads. They clearly used 2 other body doubles for her because constantly, chat, the head sizes are changing dramatically, and it doesn't work. And every time they do it, it's like it was my favorite physical running gag in the movie. It comes across very unintentionally funny. There is an excuse for like her look in the movie right here as to like, okay, she's supposed to be physically 9, but she obviously does not look like a 9-year-old. And they basically just say like, oh, she lived in Russia. Anyways, we all know that's a rough place to live in, Chad, okay? Russia's been in the news lately, and it's not great. And so they just she lived in Russia. Oh, of course. That's why she looks like she's 37. Okay, now that makes sense. And the cold and frostbite, it's just weathered her for all those years. But it's like, okay, you kind of almost run. The thing is, despite that being very unintentionally funny and them just trying to explain her age through dialogue, you're still able to go with it for the most part because they really do embrace the goofy nature of the premise and of the character of Esther. However, towards the third act, there's some really bad CGI and some very obvious green screen shots that I'm like, okay, come on. That just woefully stands out. Like I could let the body double go because it makes me laugh, but I'm looking at some really fake CGI fire. And it's like so weird that sometimes fire looks great in movies, other times it does. If you don't have the money for it, if you don't have the money for good-looking CGI fire, then just don't fucking do it. Just don't do it, okay? Or it's just some backgrounds where, all I'll say is, because you see in the trailers, there's a rooftop thing. There's a thing on a rooftop, and you're like, this is not actually on a rooftop. This is on a sound stage in a studio somewhere. That's where it is. And you just have, like, pretend that you're hot, and it's like, no. And and this is the thing that's in horror films. Like, you always have the villain that walks to the house when it's on fire. But it's like the entire fucking building is just engulfed in flame and smoke, and you would collapse of smoke inhalation, or just the heat's literally melting the glass inside the house, and yet the character doesn't have a fucking drop of sweat and looks immaculate. I'm like, oh, because she's evil. It's like, come on. That doesn't really work for me. That was one thing where like you could have changed the third act. The last 10 minutes of the movie doesn't exactly nail it. There's a lot that does work. And again, the performances of these actors that work throughout most of the film. Again, Isabelle Fuhrman as Esther, I feel like she does a great job. She does, because now she's like, well, you already know what I really am, and she embraces that weirdness. You even kind of still figuring out, like, okay, how do I act like a kid? You know, and she's kind of trying to figure out ways to do that. She's like studying the family, and she's kind of being goofy at the same time. There's a whole other sequence, chat, in this film, which I don't want to spoil. I'll talk about it later on in my spoiler review. But where she embraces her craziness is like, yeah, I know what I am, and I'm beautiful. I'm like, okay, that's pretty good. She does a good job. She does a really good job. Julia Stiles in the movie really surprised me. I don't want to say too much about her character, but she's great. I'll say she has a bit of a rivalry with Esther that I thought was very interesting and funny. And it works the majority of the time. It's really, really cool. Very surprised by her performance. We have sad dad. We have a sad dad played by, I'm not familiar with this actor. His name is Sutherland. He plays Julia Stiles' husband in the movie, and he's like this sad painter who was really affected by the disappearance of their original daughter Esther, and having Esther come back into his life. Those scenes are great. That's like the most wholesome moments in the movie is when he's on screen, whether it's with Isabelle Fuhrman or with Julia Stiles. You buy that relationship that this is a father who is so excited to be reunited with his daughter, or he's a loving and caring husband that wants to be there for his wife despite his own depression. This is pretty good. He did a really good job. It's not a role that a lot of people I think are going to be like, hey, he did great, but I want to point that out. He was kind of the emotional center of the film. And then you have another character who I don't want to say too much about, but you have Gunnar, who is the eldest son of the Albright family. That is Julia Stiles and Rossif Sutherland's eldest son, Gunnar. He's fun in the movie. That's all I'll say. They do some great things with him, and I liked his relationship with Julia Stiles. There's something you learn about them, like, oh, that's kind of cool. I did not expect that. So that worked out for me. And so the thing is, and the other thing that what comes right down to it, Chad, the thing that's going to sell you on this movie, it's either going to sell you on it or it's going to break it for you. And if you like what happens, then keep on watching because they do some really fun and imaginative things with it. The plot twist in this movie, which comes, I think, at like the 35-minute mark. It's not too deep in. But the plot twist in this movie is absolutely bonkers and fun. And you realize this, again, this is the only way they could have got away with this whole premise initially. Because then it's like, oh, that's why you have these characters interacting with her the way they're doing it. That's why they're, again, I can't say, but it's like, it makes complete sense then. It's like, okay. I get it. I do get it now. I thought that was pretty fun what they did. And then for the rest of the movie, it becomes something that you just didn't expect. So overall, I mean, yes, it has some issues. It has some unintentionally funny shots and some really messy third act. But overall, I found myself enjoying it more than not, Chad. It really, like everyone else who's been seeing this movie. I went in with, a lot of preconceived notions, like, it's going to be ridiculous. It is, but it does a smart thing because it embraces that. It's not nearly as serious as the original film. It's like, all right, we can't do that. You obviously can't do that a second time. So let's just be a goofy horror thriller. And, that works. That works, I would say, the majority of the time. And so, yeah, chat, I ended up kind of really liking this movie. So I think this is for me, on the double toast and the DT scale, I give this something like a matinee. I think you'll like it too. It's on Paramount Plus. It has a theatrical release going on right now. Truncated theatrical release. It's limited. It's a limited theatrical release. So, but if you see this in the theater, I don't think you'll be disappointed. I think you'll like it quite a bit. So, yeah, I walked away liking it, chap. A lot of the film. I want to see Isabelle Fuhrman in more things, because I'm not too familiar with her outside of these two movies. Yeah, I don't know what else she's done, but she killed it, literally.